Ngā kia ora mai anō tātou e hui nei i tēnei wā. Putau nō ki ia koutou i te motu. Putau nō te ao. Tēnei ki te mihi atu nei kia koutou i titiro mai nei i roto tēnei kaupapa ma te whakamomori hāpuri. Anō reira nau mai haerenga ki te mihi atu nei kia koutou katoa. Hoi noa mua tō tātou nei haerenga tō tātou kaupapa i tēnei wā ke tupua nei te arawhata ki tō tātou nei matunui tera. Anō reira i noi tātou. E pāmana ki te koe mātou e kore piku nei mo i a koe ke kaha koe te tuku mai tō aroha tō wairua mai ni a mātou o tō i a mātou. E pā ke kaha koe te manaki a mātou putano ke wā mātou ne kaupapa e whareki nei mo i a koe. E pā ke kaha koe te manaki tiaki wā mātou ne whānau na mātou ne wairua mātou ne wā kai. Anō reira e pā na hoki te rangatiratanga me te kaha me tau krori a ki tōni. Amen. Anō reira kia ora mai anō tātou. Te mihi atu nei ki a koutou. Putau nō ki ngā hiwa tātou nei tini mate tini aitua. Rātou ko wheturangi tia, rātou ko hoki atu nei ki te kōpu te whenua. Te tini hoki nei o mātou ko ngaro nei tēnei wā. Anō reira tēnei ki te mihi atu nei, ki te mihi atu nei, ki te mihi atu nei. Hui nō ki ngā kanui ora i hui nei, hoi nō tēnei ki te mihi atu nei ki a tātou. Ki te mihi atu nei ki a tātou katoa. E titiro mai nei ki wene o mātou waku nei hoa. I haere mai nei ki te kōrero mō tēnei take ma te whakamomori mō ngā hāpuri Māori. Anō re tēnei ki te mihi. I'd just like to welcome everyone. Welcome those ones that are tuned in. So welcome everyone to this presentation by our SDM speakers. But in the meantime, I would like to give this time over to our two co-facilitators, Pānia Lee and Moira Clooney. Nō reira e hoa mā ngā rangatira mā tēnā rā koutou, kia ora mai no tātou katoa.
Tēnā tātou, tēnā koutou, nau mai huki mai. Ki nei o ngā raupapa webinar mo te mate whakamomori. He mihi kau atu ki a koutou, ngā iwi kāranga maa. Ko Pānia Lee au, ko tēnei, ko Moira Clooney tēnei, ko māua ngā kaiwaka haere. Welcome back to the second of 3 webinars on Māori suicide prevention brought to you by the Mental Health Foundation in collaboration with Victoria University and the support of the Ministry of Health. For those of you who have just joined us today, my name is Pānia and I will be co-facilitating with my colleague Moira Clooney, focusing on Māori suicide prevention involving whānau and the community.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Welcome again to all of you. Again, we have almost 800 of you registered from around the country, as well as a few international guests. Before we introduce today's speakers, I just wanted to outline the logistics for today. Our webinar runs from 12:30 to 1:30. We'll introduce our two presenters and they'll both share short presentations, and then we'll take questions from our audience. So if you have a question, you can send this through by email, Twitter or Facebook. So you can email Sophia, S-O-P-H-I-A, @mentalhealth.org.nz. On Twitter, you can tweet us at SuicideNZ, or on Facebook, you can leave a comment on the Mental Health Foundation's Facebook page. So you can do that right now or at any time during the session today. You can also access the PowerPoint slides for today's session on the SPINS website, www.spins.org.nz. That's spinz.org.nz. Those are online now if you want to browse through them at your own pace.
Nei rā te mei ki ngā pokorua, ko mai ko ngaira tēnei rawa ko Diagranau. He uri a mai ko no te riu o ngā pūmanua e waru e ko te aroa waka. He uri waka heke a dai no Ngāti Motunga o Ware Kauri me Ngai Tau. It's with our great pleasure to welcome today's guest presenters Michael Ngaira and Diagranau. Michael comes to us from Te Runanga o Ngāti Pikiao, where he is a Kia Piki Te Ora project leader in Māori suicide prevention for the Te Arawa region, mai make tū ki Tongariro that spans from Rotorua, Kaingaroa, Taupō, Tūrangi and Manga Kino. Michael brings with him a wealth of experience as a regional project leader in Māori suicide prevention and as an advisor for the Mental Health Foundation Suicide Prevention New Zealand, Te Whakauru Ora and Lakes DHB Postvention Advisory Boards. Michael will present on Indigenous responses to suicide prevention through community development and community action initiatives and the National Kia Piki Te Ora Network.
Di Grinnell is the Director of Operations Whānau and Social Policy Wahanga at Te Puni Kōkiri, the Ministry of Māori Development. Te Puni Kōkiri is the lead agency for Whānau Ora, which is designed to build whānau capability and whānau-centred services. Di is a mother, stepmother and proud grandmother of 6 mokopuna. She had a background in family violence prevention, social services education and iwi and Māori provider development prior to joining Te Puni Kōkiri in 2010. Di will present on the whānau ora concept, strengthening whānau wellbeing, capability and whānau-centred approaches to services and suicide prevention activities.
So without further ado, nau mai, hara mai e ngā raurangatira tōko rua, kei a kōrua te wā.
Kia ora no tātou katoa. Pauri tū, pauri noho, pauri tapu tapu, tai atu ki te tūramarama ki te ora. Kei te mihi atu nei au ki a koutou katoa, ti hei Māori ora. Kia ora no tātou katoa. Thank you for introducing me here today. The presentation that I'm going to talk about, that I'm going to explain today is about tūramarama ki te ora. And tūramarama ki te ora is about focusing on the future, where we're heading for Māori suicide prevention, not only as Māori ourselves, but as Aotearoa New Zealand and throughout the world. So, kei te mihi atu nei kia koutou. Te mea tuatahi, he poroporo ake ki ngā mate, ko hinga, ko mene atu ki te pō, kia rātou mā, hi koi māro ki tua o te ārai. Nō reira, haere atu rā. Tai noa ki ngā whānau pani o te motu nei, ngā whānau pani hei tangi tonu, e mihi nunui ki a koutou katoa. Kai a koutou te kākau taratara mo tēnei wā. Aroha pai atu ki a koutou katoa. Ki ngā mana whenua, te whanganui ātara, a Ngāti toa, tēnei te mihi atu nei ki a koutou. Tai noa ki a tātou katoa o te motu nei, tēnā koutou katoa. So, just a quick greetings to those who have lost loved ones to suicide. Me mihi atu nei ki a koutou. To mana whenua, to Victoria University for hosting today. Ngā mihi atu nei ki a koutou. And to all those who have signed on today to register to learn a bit more about Indigenous Māori suicide prevention. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. It's important for me to start by demystifying the common beliefs that currently exist amongst Māori people. And this is an Indigenous approach to looking at Māori suicide prevention. But firstly, suicide is not entrenched in tikanga Māori. Professor Sir Mason Drury said this at one of his lectures, that it is not entrenched in tikanga Māori. That suicide is not normal for Māori as well. And we shouldn't normalise this for Māori, that although it's existing in its current form, in its current state today, it is not normal for our people. Sir Mason Drury also goes into looking at it as a sequence leading up to suicide. It could rely on internal mechanisms, such as looking at mental illnesses, then leads into maybe external mechanisms, looking in things like problem gambling and other things that negatively impact on Māori, and also to the global mechanisms, looking at things like global warming and how that affects Papatūānuku and Ranginui, and that in turn affects our people. One of the things that I'd just like to put out there is that suicide is not whakamōmori. And whakamōmori has been used throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand, as a transliterate word for suicide. Whakamōmori is actually a state of mental, it's actually a state. And so whakamōmori looks at the deep-seated hurt or mamai that's within a person, as opposed to whakamōmori being suicide. Suicide is painfully shattering and globally spread. And I say this because often when a suicide occurs in a community, we are of the mindset that is only contained to that community. But we must remember that our whakapapa not only extends throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand, it also extends throughout the world as well. We've got families in England, families in America, so of course it's going to affect our whānau overseas as well. Before I carry on, I've got a glossary at the end of this presentation in terms of understanding the Māori words that I'm talking about today, so you can actually access my PowerPoint and the meanings behind these words. Suicide is not singular but complex. It remains with the person. The decision is with the person to actually look at the decision to take his or her life. But the thing that we need to understand that it is complex, that it is accumulation of loss, that it may not be just one thing, as Mason Drury has stated. It's a raft of things that lead to suicide. And of course, in New Zealand, Aotearoa, and for those who are listening in from around the world, Māori are twice as likely to be affected by suicide in our country, and are twice as likely to be affected for suicide attempts and self-harm. So there is an assumption that Māori suicide relies on a lot of factors. I've got 4 dot points up there at the moment. So it relies on hapu implementing tikanga and kawa. So there's an assumption that our hapu around the motu are seeking support from their kaumātua, seeking support from their kuia, seeking support from the whole whānau. The biggest thing with Māori is that we rely on wairua, or the spiritual element, and these specialised, these tohunga or these specialists bring those into hapu. Now, hapu is our tribal, where our tribes are. For those who are from around the world and don't understand, hapu is where I come from, where my genealogy goes towards, my ancestry, my place where I stand. And so there's assumption that there's tikanga and kawa when a suicide occurs. Hapori Māori. So when we look at hapori Māori, in my terms, hapori Māori can mean anything. But specifically for this presentation today, hapori Māori for me are those that are dislocated, disengaged with their culture, those who are in geographical areas but have very little contact with their own hapu. And so there is the assumption that hapori Māori are connecting back to their whakapapa, whenua, te reo, which is Māori language, and their spiritual element. There is the assumption that service providers have their own policies and procedures in place whereby Māori that are entering into your services, those who are at risk or at serious risk, are identified by the specialists that are seeing our people. that they can then refer them on to other specialists, not only in mainstream, but also to kaumātua and kui, which is our elders, also to the whānau that they belong to, or the hapu that they belong to. There is an assumption that government is contributing to Māori advancement, and so we expect from government that policies are strong, that support Māori well-being and Māori advancement. So there is assumption that those are in place. So the lessons I've learnt, so having worked in the Lakes District Health Board region, the lessons that we've learnt there, myself and my colleague, is that there is a difference between hapu and hapori Māori. And hapu, when a suicide occurs, the hapu come together and they surround their whānau. They look at the grieving process from an indigenous approach. They look at how to support a whānau through their grief, through to well-being. They look at our general practices that are occurring on our marae so that they can help. And hapori Māori, the lessons we've learnt in hapori Māori is that disconnection is huge in hapori Māori when a suicide occurs. And a lot of our hapori Māori rely on the state to take care of their needs because of their limited access to kaumātua and kui. So the lessons we've learnt so far is that we need to look at how do we connect hapu and hapori Māori together. But the realities is that hapu, many of our hapu have all the tikanga and the kawa, all the Māori customs to go with dealing with mate. But identifying how to assess someone that's at risk is limited on our marae. So when someone is at risk, identifying that isn't quite there, if I could say that. So the other things with hapu is that there's a general understanding that whānau are taking care of their loved ones, and that when someone's at risk, that they have the mechanisms to take care of that person or that people, that person. Hapori Māori, so the realities with hapori Māori is that, to put it in simple terms, hapori Māori are just looking to put food on the table. Hapori Māori are looking from day to day to pay their power bill. And if a suicide occurs, those who are living in hapori Māori are looking at how to pay for the funeral bill and the expenses that come with that. So when the state comes in and provides them with postvention mechanisms, all they want to do is just to look at day-to-day living and getting over the grief of suicide. So lessons learned from suicide, from service providers. Now there is a siloed effect here where our loved ones are going from schools into the health organisations, into social services. So it's sort of like a bunny hop effect. So no one's actually picking up if our people are mawīwi or sick, or they're feeling down, or they're at risk. So they're hopping along all these systems, and they tend to. And so what we're needing to do is to look at how we close that gap, how we look at our organisations working together. Okay. So we had a few questions this morning come in, and on how to work with rangatahi, how to work with kaumātua. But my key message today is that it's up to your community. I'm from Te Aroha, and Te Aroha can't tell you how to run your rohe. My DHB can't tell you how to run your DHB. And the thing that we need to do as a people or as a community is to get together and hui and have a kōrero, and to come up with community strategies to deal with this ngangara, to deal with the pauri that exists within our community. And only community can do that. And if we're disconnected from hapori Māori, if we're disconnected from hapu, how do we expect the rates of suicide for Māori to be reduced? The key thing in my presentation today is that we're looking at protection of mana and the protection of wairua. So mana extends to the person who maybe has passed on, looking at the protection at those who have attempted suicide. And the main thing for me is looking at the protection of whānau who are currently grieving at the moment. That we shouldn't fear them because they've lost someone to suicide, that we shouldn't manaki our whānau without the fear that they have a suicide label above their heads. Let's go back to where our tupuna and our ancestors, how they manaki our loved ones who are grieving. Wairua, the wairua is the biggest aspect that we need to look at, and the government policies that I've read and community policies that I read, wairua is non-existent within these policies, but it exists in hapuri Māori and it exists in hapu, and it's very strong. And so although the wairua diminishes when a suicide occurs, hapu and hapuri Māori have the ability to pick that wairua up. As Māori and as service providers, we need to ensure that we walk alongside hapu and whānau as opposed to coming down and putting a westernised view on hapu and hapuri Māori. We need to walk together. We need to do that together. So, in ending, whakatauki from our esteemed kaumātua Te Ariki Morehu from Te Arawa, a kare au I tutuki I au, and that's why I'm here today. And Te Ariki said to me, that I went to him for his wise counsel, and I said, oh, what am I going to say, Te Ariki? He said, you're here to deliver a message not only to our own hapuri Māori and our hapu, you're here to deliver a message to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and now to the world. Kei te mihi a te nei kia koutou katoa. 16 minutes.
He mihi ati tēnei ki a koutou, ngā kai kōrero o te rā, tēnā rā koutou, ki a koe Michael, tēnā koe mo tō kōrero a tāhua. I join my acknowledgements with those that have already been given, particularly for those of you who have joined in and registered on this webinar because you are dealing with issues within your own whānau and your own community. And I know there will be some of you there, and to acknowledge that really when we come to look at this particular take, we're normally grappling with numbers of questions. And I started my presentation with this question, he aha te waiata, what's the song? And there'll be times for every whānau, or most whānau, when we're engaged in activity that involves us with our kaua and our tikanga, when you see the eyebrows sort of go up or people whisper to each other, oh, what's the song, or what's our song? And having a song implies a whole lot of things about the ways in which we're connected, the intergenerational or other knowledge we've had the opportunity to engage with. And so for me, the conversation about suicide prevention is in no small part about how we put the songs back for our whānau, for our hapu, for our iwi, for our communities. And this particular phrase that sits on the slide in front of you, from the words of Moko Moko, before he was hung in Mount Eden prison, take the rope from my throat that I may sing my song, were words that I came across in the mid-1990s when working with a number of whānau who were impacted on by the suicides of young people who instead had made a choice to put the rope around their own throat and end their song. And that stimulated probably, I suppose, a continued life of work that centres around these questions. And I think they're questions that we grapple with irrespective of what our work role is or where we might sit within our own whānau, hapu and iwi, but how we create the sorts of structures and experiences that bring whānau together to identify their own strengths, their own issues, their own solutions, their own pathways, and how we develop and realise the protective potential of whānau. And so for me, these are very much whānau ora questions that we need to be asking at a policy level. So as a government official, what are my responsibilities for thinking about how we create those structures and experiences and realise that potential? As service providers, how do we do that? How do we organise our mahi in a way that means that whānau are actually in the driver's seat, not the passengers being towed along behind our range of services? At an iwi and hapu level, what do we have in place that will stimulate this? And then within our own whānau, how do we work to develop and realise the protective potential of our members? Mm-hmm. Now, I want to bring a reality balance to that kōrero as well, though, and Michael's touched on some of the challenges that exist between those of our whānau who are in more challenging circumstances and our hapori Māori, because there's a risk if we go down this particular whānau track that we can oversimplify and then make whānau responsible for everything. Mm. And Michael's referred to the work of Professor Sir Mason Jury already today, but this particular quote from Mason I think becomes really, really important. Where we have whānau who lack particular material and social resources, this can really undermine the ability of whānau to exercise that protection and to protect their family members. So I think we need to be really very balanced then in our approach to what it is that whānau are able to do for themselves and how we can support and stimulate that. There's a context in which our suicide prevention kōrero sits that's also an economic conversation. It's an employment conversation. It's an education conversation. It's a community conversation. And so we need to have care that within this we look at the whole broad range of factors that will enable our whānau to flourish so they can exercise that protective potential for individual whānau members who might be challenged. I think also that it's easy to become overwhelmed, firstly by the pain, and then by the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with. Mm. And in that whole picture, then difficult perhaps to work out where we position and what it is that we might be responsible for. And of course we can't see you out there, but we know from your registrations you come from a whole range of roles and situations. And the spectrum of prevention is a tool that I think can be quite useful for us starting to think through where we are positioned and what our role might be in respect of both this whānau conversation and the suicide prevention conversation, so that we bring balance again to that and look at the different levels at which we might all work to influence the things that we are able to influence. It's really important that we have people who are able to be working at a community level, such as Michael and the other Kia Piki Te Ora coordinators, and working with hapu and with community to strengthen the knowledge and skills of individual members of whānau and promote education and wānanga in those communities so that people start to build their own tools and their own resources. There are others of you, though, who will be sitting at an organisational practice level or at a policy or legislative level. And my invitation to you all is then to go back to those initial questions that I asked about how we create the structures and experiences that best support whānau, and whether we're policy, providers, organisational practice, to bring that lens and to bring that thought into the discussion and understand what it is that sits right within our circle of influence that we're able to exercise and create change in. I think the other thing for us all is then to start to really think through the work that's been done already around Māori models of practice, and this is one that's well known, again from Mason's work, Te Whare Tapawha, and really start to think through what it means at a whānau level if we're going to be embracing what we call holistic methods, and if we're going to be thinking about what are practical actions and practical things that whānau can engage in. So taha tinana, having had some previous experience as a mental health respite provider, never failed to interest me. The lack of emphasis there was on looking at exercise and nutrition for people who had issues that they were grappling with in terms of their mental health. And increasingly, as I look at some of the information that's coming through to us from whānau, through whānau water, also really interested in the interface with other aspects of health care and how often whānau and whānau members are limited by physical conditions and illness that contribute to stress, depression, isolation, or limit their opportunity to participate in employment. So there's some really interesting things for us to think about there, and what are the catalysts for our physical action. I and Māori, on the face of it, may not necessarily be seen as a suicide prevention initiative. I'd suggest that those elements of engagement, whānau connection, and all of the things that sit alongside it actually mean that it is, in fact, speaking into those issues. Those of you who had the privilege of hearing Kiri's kōrero will know the things that she talked about, particularly in terms of spiritual dimensions and the challenges that have come to us over time as we've been displaced and dislocated as a people. And sometimes we can overcomplicate the spiritual, but many of our spiritual practices are linked to place, and I think that's part of Michael's point about hapu and hapu connections. The opportunity to link to water, to our awa, our lakes, our maunga, our sacred stones, our places that we can go and engage. How can we support whānau to engage in that journey and to connect in ways that are safe? Taha hinengaro, language is really important. Do our people have a language, either te reo Māori or any other language, in which they can communicate and express themselves, whether it's their dreams or their fears? And how do we support that? How do we support what our tupuna knew about having a disciplined and unclouded mind, whether that's a mind that's free from the influence of drugs and alcohol, or a mind that has been trained to think and analyse and reflect, so that people know that they do actually have a choice, that pain is part of life, but it doesn't have to be the end of that story. And in terms of whānau, then the role of connection, of genealogy or of our whakapapa, of inclusion of all members of the whānau, so that everybody has the opportunity to be a contributor, not just seen as someone who has an issue or a problem in their whānau. So I think there's a great deal of work that we can continue to do to support and walk alongside whānau in stimulating and growing their skills and strengths in all of these areas, and in doing that ourselves and for ourselves. And I suppose, you know, that's a challenge back to each one of us at this table as well, as to how well we're moving from having a model of practice that sits on a shelf to actually having these things as practices and models for the way that we live. So obviously key influences within the whānau have got to be those who are in a relationship of trust. And we've touched on many of the points that are sitting here around the importance of spiritual and cultural responses, traditional ways of assessing and engaging, the importance of identity. But there's two things I'd like to just stress here, the two bottom points. One is that cultural and clinical approaches can be complementary. We don't have to turn whānau into clinicians That's not their role. We do need clinicians who understand whānau though, and that becomes important. These can be complementary. They don't have to argue with each other. The other is that within our broader whānau order approach, we've seen some really exciting things that I haven't got time to talk about today in the whole area of whānau planning and seeding hope and aspiration. And I'd encourage you to have a look at the website reference that's on the slide and look at some of the stories that are starting to come through from that particular space, because we're starting to see how whānau planning is creating an opportunity for that engagement and that conversation, and we're keen to see and understand more about how that can work for whānau in a protective way. So, in summary, if we're going to be talking about what our song is, and if we're going to be talking about the opportunities that we have to engage with and for whānau, and I'm just doing a time check here because that's always helpful. I think my other word would be kia tūpato, and protect and guard our hearts, because despite our best intention, our best intervention, there are times when an individual member of our whānau is that meeting place of time, history, opportunity, stress factors, internal factors, external factors, brain chemistry and choice, and someone does take their life. And that's something that we need to continue to hold while we hold all of that sense of power and potential that sit within our whānau and the ways that we can exercise that. In terms of the song that I think we want to be able to replace for our whānau, if every member of every whānau had an understanding of what we have here, that they are a seed sown in rangiatea, that they are seeds sown from greatness. If that was all we did, then I think that we would start to see some real change, and we have to think about all of that. Nō reira, e hoa mā. He kakanoa hau, I rui a mai, I rangi a te a. And I can never be lost. I am a seed, born of greatness, descended from a line of chiefs. He kakanoa hau. Nō reira, kia ora mai tātou.
Kia ora. Thank you, Di. That was beautiful. And thank you both, Di and Michael, for your insight and for your messages of hope and strength. So we've got some time for questions. Just before we get into that, I just wanted to quickly remind people how you can send through questions for our presenters. You can do that either by email, Twitter or Facebook. So you can email Sophia, SOPHAA, @mentalhealth.org.nz. On Twitter, you can tweet us at SuicideNZ, or on Facebook, you can leave a comment on the Mental Health Foundation's Facebook page. So, first question that's come through was before the session from a child and adolescent mental health service working in a crisis team, who's asked how they can be effective working within mainstream services to support Hapori Māori. Let's to take that.
Effective. How is it effective?
How they can be effective.
They can affect.
As a message.
I guess one of the biggest things about being effective, working in mainstream, and working in mainstream is basically just touching on what I was talking about, that to looking at the culturally appropriate approaches towards our whānau. The next thing is to look at your own policies within your organisation to see if for example, someone who is at risk enters into your organisation, and where the staff are able to work with our people who have walked through the door. And often what we get is that when our whānau walk through the door in mainstream and in Māori providers is a panic attack because the person has, I'm going to take my life. Now we need to reduce that by looking at how effective is our training for staff so that they don't reflect back that they're in their panic attack, that they manaki our people. One of the first things we need to do is firstly offer them a cup of tea. So that may be the first thing you need to do in mainstream is offer them a cup of tea, me noho, and to talk. But in mainstream, it's looking at your own policies, and they need to be sound, and staff need to know how to work with those policies. They need to be trained in those policies so that our people aren't discriminated against when they walk through the door. So kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Yeah, so the last seminar, Kiri focused on the importance of a paradigm shift in how we deal with the issue of Māori suicide and highlighted the importance of engaging with whānau and traditional knowledge. And today, Michael and Di talked about the practical steps for whānau and community in Māori suicide prevention strategies. And a couple of questions have come through. One question from Te Whānau o Whangaruru, who have asked, how do you address the issue of service providers who hold contracts but do not engage with those communities who have lost loved ones to suicide? So I think it's a question of responsibility as well, like who is responsible for engaging with whānau?
Well, I think everyone's responsible, but I think it's a challenging and complex environment when we start to break into the areas of service funding, because there's no doubt that contracts tend to fragment and we end up perhaps with postvention, prevention, intervention, crisis intervention, primary, secondary and tertiary services, and somehow in the middle of all of that you can find a whānau or a community, particularly sometimes those in rural and isolated communities who can't find the place for that service need to be met. And sometimes too there can be misunderstandings about the sort of responsibility that a particular provider might have. Often we hear the word suicide in their service description and assume that they cover all of those things, and they may not. But there are points of contact that can involve district health boards, that can involve a conversation with the provider themselves who you believe might carry that responsibility. But I take Michael's point about panic, because the other thing that sometimes comes into this is judgment. And we can sometimes look at another provider from the outside and think maybe they're not doing their job. We don't necessarily know until we've had the conversation. So I'm a great believer in māti kōrero, engage with them, talk with them, find out what it is that they are doing and how they can support in your particular community.
And just to add on, service providers, some service providers don't know how to engage. So that's another process of how do we engage with communities, how do we engage with hapuri, Māori and hapu. So that's something that the service will have to discuss, and how they link with iwi to come in and speak to them about how they engage with their own communities. So, koe rā noho.
So one question is, how would whānau be better engage with service providers? How do they make that relationship, build that relationship?
We shouldn't become independent. Māori shouldn't become independent on service providers. We should look at our own strategies. Firstly, that who's to say that our kaumātua don't have the wisdom to look after our people? Who don't say, why shouldn't our kui look after our people? Why shouldn't our mokopuna be safe? But as Di mentioned in her presentation, sometimes that takes a bit of time to awhi our whānau. But I think the goal for us as Māori or as an indigenous race of this country, we should look at aiming at a goal to move towards how do we take care of our own people without becoming independent or dependent on the state and becoming independent of the state, which is a big statement in itself. But hey, we have rangatira that have passed on, that have done miracles for us. So, koe rā noiho. Kei a koe.
Perhaps just picking up on that point around practical steps that whānau can take, and maybe some of what, Michael, you were saying around hapori Māori earlier. It's a question about Māori with disability. So the question is, what are some of the practical ways that urban disconnected whānau members with disabilities can start the process of self-healing and connecting back to culture, where the whānau don't practice tikanga Māori or anything along those lines?
Yeah.
I think that's a really significant challenge, and one that we've been exploring to some degree in the whānau water space with the advice and support of some of our leaders in the disability field who from whānau Haua, because there are double and triple wounds sometimes for whānau and community there, particularly when with certain disability types people have historically been removed from their whānau. So I would encourage you, if that's a particular issue or interest, you might want to email in to Te Puni Kōkiri to our information email address or to our whānau water email address, because there are a couple of things that we could identify for you as some practical places to start in that conversation, and perhaps some people who might be able to provide you with some advice in that area.
Cool. Thanks for that. Just another one, how do we ensure our services and approaches are reflective of the diverse realities of Māori today?
Main thing is that you need your advisors around you, your Māori advisors. You need iwi, hapu to sit at the table with you. If you're going to look at a strategy to move ahead, you need to look at your own Māori health teams to support you as well in designing or even looking at how you engage with communities and that. It's so important that happens, because, as I said earlier, our people are coming through the doors and they feel uncomfortable. They feel uncomfortable to talk to a clinician. They feel uncomfortable to even go to the hospital per se. So you need to start from the basics, which is align with your communities, your Māori communities, get them and have a kōrero.
I think for me a big part of that is actually listening to and seeing where people are at. You know, we have a good short saying, te tiro hakarongo kōrero. You know, observe, listen, then talk. And I think that diversity expresses itself often in urban settings where we've got young people who might have Māori and Pacifica background or other backgrounds and engagements. And so listening to and observing where they are most comfortable and how they prefer to engage. And then, as Michael said, understanding your community well enough to respond and engage in ways and in places that they feel safe is really important.
We've talked about the complexities of suicide, and one of the questions is, how do you see Māori suicide in relation to other addictions such as problem gambling, alcoholism, and how would you address these types of coexisting issues or complexities?
Well, as I mentioned in my assumptions, that there is assumption that problem gambling organisations are doing the mahi. There's an assumption that those in the child abuse arena are taking care of our tamariki. There is an assumption that SIFs are taking care of our children. So upon that assumption is that you have your policies in place or your assessments in place to take care of our kids, kaumātua kui, who come through the door. Now, suicide is a symptom of all those contributing factors, such as problem gambling, child abuse, sexual abuse, even transgender as well. But as long as everyone's doing their job, the hope is that the suicide rate does not escalate and that it reduces. I hope I answered that question.
I think that's that's part of the challenge and the complexity is yes. And I think Michael's identified some really good points around everybody understanding their work and having the policies and procedures in place. I think the challenge from the whānau end is what they experience when they're trying to deal with fragmented service provision. And so what it is perhaps that we're able to support, and one of the approaches that we are putting some more emphasis on within the whānau order approach is actually navigation approaches that will help link whānau to services rather than whānau having to almost take a yellow pages or a website approach of trying to identify which thing for which issue and giving up because it just feels too complicated. So who will walk with them on that journey and not say, oh sorry, my contract only takes me as far as pathology or problem X, I can't walk with you anymore.
If I could just offer an example from our rohe or from Te Arawa, we had a karaua and his daughter lose their mokopuna, or her son, and their conversation with us was that we had all these services come in, we had the hapu trying to help us, we had everyone else from outside of our district come in to help us, but all we wanted to do was grieve, was actually grieve and to tangi because we've just lost someone. And so their key message was that we just wanted our tikanga kept intact, or our Māori customs kept intact. We wanted our mana kept intact, and we also just wanted to acknowledge that the pauri was there and to work through the pauri or the sadness of that loss. So, koera noiho. If we're looking at those who are attempting suicide or self-harming, I'm sure it's looking at their dignity as well, their integrity, looking at the person's integrity, looking at their mana, looking at their wairua, ensuring that that's intact. It's no good when you're turning up to a service and you're turned away because you've been told that you're seeking attention. Kau. When we're welcomed on to marae, we take, when our Wise Council welcome manuhiri or guests onto the marae, they don't look at what they're bringing, they're looking at their ancestors that they're bringing with them, and they acknowledge that we should all do that as well.
I've got a question on tikanga, and we've already identified that that's essential in suicide prevention. And maybe the question requires a little bit of clarity around, the question is, if suicide is not entrenched in tikanga and not normal for Māori, then why do we need to empower it by giving it a Māori name?
He pātai pai tērā.
Ko koe tērā.
He's throwing that one at me as fast as maybe we don't need to empower it by giving it a Māori name. And I enjoyed Michael's comments and the reflection on whakamomori, and I'm aware that both Kiri and others have done some work around sort of unpicking and understanding what is there. And it's always a challenge. Do we empower or create something as an additional reality by applying those kupu to it, or do we silence it or shut it down by not having a word? I think the critical thing is what will allow us to have the conversation in a way that's safe and in a way that can be clearly understood by those who are seeking to be part of the conversation.
Kia ora. And on that point, one question is about engagement and engaging. So our high suicide rates are with rangatahi, so how do pāhaki engage with that group of
Yeah. The main thing that I've observed in the 3 years that I've been working in this industry is leadership is leadership, and the reason why I say that is that it's their problem, it's their problem. But I'm looking at you through this camera. I can't see you, of course, but if you were to look at me straight in the in the eyes, you guys are the leaders. You guys are the leaders in the change for this kaupapa. Okay, it's not uncle down the road, it's not auntie down the road, it's not the minister of health, it's not that, it's you. So leadership comes in all forms, and so you know, he kupu kia koutou, he tū whakarangatira koutou. Stand up and make a difference for this kaupapa.
Is that rangatahi stand up and make a difference for the kaupapa? Or?
Well, rangatahi, let's look at rangatahi, since that keeps coming through the reins. And myself and my colleague did a wānanga about 2 or 3 months ago. And rangatahi look at us adults and they say, well, you guys don't really understand. You don't understand us. You send us to all these mental health organisations and the police, but we don't trust them. And we said to them, so what do? And they said, we talk amongst ourselves. We have our own clique. So I don't know what the answer is for rangatahi. Maybe we need to ask rangatahi. Maybe we need to sit them in the room and say, how tō whakaro mo tēnei? What are your thoughts for this? Because, you know, I'm heading on into my 20s. Nah. I'm heading on, and so all jokes aside, we need to ask rangatahi. Rangatahi know the way forward for themselves.
The only quick comment I'd add to that is that if we're not already engaging in a relationship with our rangatahi, our taiohi, then what makes us think that we can jump into this conversation with them? So if we're stepping back into that more kind of whānau thinking mode, what are the opportunities to build and strengthen the relationships and engagement across generations and between whānau members? How do we value our taiohi and our rangatahi, or do we only seek to engage with them when they seem to present to us as a problem or an issue? And I think we need to get our focus way into how we engage respectfully on their terms and on our terms. It's a two-way street, so that when these difficult issues come up, we already have established communication pathways.
Kia ora. I have one final question before we finish, and it's about developing a strategy. And the question is, should hapu focus on developing a hapu-based strategy as an individual hapu, or can hapu develop a strategy as a collective hapu, iwi, and a national, or at a national level as well? What's your advice?
What the key messages we're offering in Te Arawa, and I can only talk for Te Arawa, is that a specific hapu, Ngāti Pukiao, have developed their own hapu strategy to look at this take. And we had a whare nui of over 200 people attend, and they had input into that strategy. So kaya koutou, whatever you think is right for your hapu, just kola hui, bring the whānau together, bring the hapu together, and kōrero. And that's the main thing, kōrero. And just finally, before I hand it over to Dai, Te Ariki Mōreo, who said to us when we had this hapu hui, he said, anei te papa me kōrero. And so everyone in the whare talked about it, and now they've got a strategy. So, inspiration for you, Pia.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Not a great deal to add, except work in the ways that you normally organise yourselves and have found to be effective when you deal with other issues, whether positive issues or challenging issues. How do you best organise to achieve a good result, and start there rather than waiting for everybody to want to join your kōrero? Kia ora.
Yeah.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. So, we'll wrap up there. Thanks again for your time, attention and participation. Thanks for all your questions. And thanks to both of our presenters, Di and Michael. It was great to hear your perspectives and your insight. Thanks again to Victoria University of Wellington for hosting us, and to my colleagues at the Mental Health Foundation for their work putting this series together. The slides from the session are on our website already at spins.org.nz, and the video will be online shortly. So if you've registered, we'll send you the link for that. Otherwise, keep an eye on the Spins website over the next few days. The recording of our last webinar with Kiri Lawson-Tiaho is online as well for you to have a look at if you didn't get a chance to make it along to that session. The next webinar in this series is on the 19th of March. The topic is around improving care and intervention for Māori. And we'll hear from Dr. Nick Coop and Dr. Lynn Russell, who both have research backgrounds in this area. You can register for that on our website as well. So thank you again. I'll hand over to Witi Ashby to close.
Kia ora tātou. I te mea ke rā korongo nei koutou ngā kōrero i tēnei rā, putano ki wēne o mātou nei wēnei tokoruan i kōrero me nei warātu nei whaaraua nei whakaaro. Putano o tēnei kaupapa ma te whakamamori. Nō reira tēnei ke te mihi atu nei ki wā tātu nei kai kōrero. Putano ki wāku nei rangatira mō tō tātu nei mahi Mental Health Foundation tēnei ke te mihi atu ki a tātou. Katoa, putano ki wā tātou nei kai hautu nei a tātou i roto tēnei whare ki te mihi atu nei, ki tēnei whare. Nō reira, I'd just like to thank everyone that's watching in today, and especially to our two esteemed colleagues that came in for kōrero today, and especially for my colleagues from the Mental Health Foundation who came down today to put this together, and especially to Pania Lee and Maura Clooney, who facilitated this webinar. I'd like to thank them too as well. And on behalf of Mental Health Foundation, I'd like to thank you all. Before I'd like to close with a krakia. Nō reira tēnei ki te mihi atu, koe tātou wareware ki wā tātou nei tini mā te tini ai tua. Nā tātou ko wheturangi tia rātou ko hoki atu nei ki te kōpu te whenua. Ki te mihi atu nei, ki te mihi atu nei. I'd also like to thank those ones around the world who's watching these, from America, from Australia, from all over. So thank you very much for linking in. Nō reira, inoi tātou. E pāmana ki te koe mātou i tēnei wā. Putano ki ngā kōrero ko puta mai nei, tēnei ki te mihi atu nei kia koe ke kaha koe te mana ki a mātou i tēnei wā. Putano ki te kaupapa e whāriki ni mui a mātou tēnei mea kōrero nei a mātou i tēnei wā mā te whakamomo. E pā ke kaha koe te mana ki wā tātou nei whānau ko hinga atu nei i roto tēnei pauritanga. Ke kaha koe te mana, ke kataha koe te tanga o ngā taimahatanga nui a rātou, ngā rātou nei pokowhiwhi e roto a rātou nei ngā koe putano ki te pinanga. Nō reira pāno hoki te rangatira tanga me te kaha me tau kōre a ki tonu. Kia ora mai anō tātou.